Welcome to Friday 13th YouTube channel Metalheads. Today you're going to be watching an interview with a UK progressive metal band called Sky Empire. Now the band have just released their second album. It's called The Shifting Tectonic Plates of Power Part 1, the follow-up to the first album or EP called Dark Tower. So I'd like to thank Dan for doing this interview. Metalheads, please enjoy this interview. Please subscribe and share this interview. And also check out the band's music. It's absolutely fantastic. If you're a fan of Dream Theater, Dark Waters, Ivanhoe, then you're really going to enjoy this band. So thanks again, Dan, for doing this interview. Stay metalheads. Thanks for watching. Greeting metalheads. We're talking to Dan from the band Sky Empire. Welcome to Friday 13th, Dan.
Thanks, Jason. Good to be here.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you some warm-up questions first. First of all, as a musician, so as a bass player, was bass play your first instrument? And was there anybody in your family growing up musicians as well, or was it just yourself?
It was my first instrument. Yeah, I sort of mucked about on the piano a little bit when I was really young, but it was the first instrument that I played when I decided I was going to be in bands. All of my mates were guitarists, and they were way better than I would have been as a beginner. So I thought, okay, well, we'll just pick up the bass. But I had a little bit of music theory behind me, so I thought, well, it can't be that difficult. And when you're sort of starting out doing Oasis covers and the odd early Beatles sort of skiffle thing, and this is pretty easy, this. And then you graduate to the hard stuff. First, it goes to, I think that we first graduated to like things like Bon Jovi, and then it got Guns N' Roses, and then it got to Metallica, and then it went to Pantera, and you keep getting to the heavier and heavier stuff. It got more complicated. My dad played guitar. He was always messing about with an acoustic guitar. He would play things like Clapton and the old Delta blues guys, like Muddy Waters and B.B. King and Big Bill Broonzy. He used to play that sort of thing. And so I sort of picked up quite a bit off of him. And then as soon as I was a teenager, me and a few mates in school, we thought, come on, let's give this a go. And so we got ourselves our instruments and started making a terrible racket.
So what was your first big bass guitar that you had? Was it what make?
That was it was a Squire Jazz.
And do you still own it?
No, I don't. No, I don't.
Some people do. Some people don't. That's why.
I get it. But the thing is, because musical has always been there in my life, whether it's playing it or listening to it. But the intensity of it or how much it's been in my life has varied as the years have gone by. And so I wasn't always playing to a serious degree. And there was one point where I thought my chance at actually playing music reasonably seriously is probably gone. So I got rid of a lot of my gear. I still got, well, sort of, started to build it back up after opportunities started to knock again. But it was unfortunately, I'll never see that one again.
Okay, so as a bass player, who's inspired you? Which bass players?
Oh, well, always loved Steve Harris, and I used to love Duff McKagan a lot. I really like John Mayung these days. But my all-time favorite might surprise you. I used to like Fieldy as well. When I dabbled in nu metal in the 90s, I actually really liked Fieldy. I thought musically he was probably the top guy in the band, in Korn. But my favorite bass player is Stuart Zender from Jamiroquai, which is a completely different tangent. But I listened to everything in the 90s. I sort of gobbled everything I could get, whether it was dance music or whether it was metal or hip hop or some of the good stuff that was in the charts. And Jamiroquai, I thought, but musically were just fabulous, and I still do think they're fabulous. And Stuart Zender's bass playing, I loved that punchy sound that he got from his Warwick. I loved the character and the humor that he brought to his bass. He used the wah-wah pedal quite a lot, which is a bit unusual for a bass player. And it wasn't just trotting out, oh, I'm going to do, my inversions and my scales, and I'm just going to sort of hang at the bottom of the frequency register and just support the guitars. He was bringing all sorts of character to his bass playing, and that really inspired me when I was growing up. So yeah, it might actually be Stuart Zender. Of our sort of genre of music, I still think Steve Harris is my favourite. But I might be biased because we're both from the East London and we're both West Ham fans as well.
So, as you say about Jamiroquai, I'm guessing you're going to be a fan of Level 42. Mark, he's a hell of a bass player.
Yeah, Mark King, yeah, old Thunder Thumbs, yeah, he was great as well. I mean, yeah, the thing is, there's so many Louis Johnson as well, and Flea, all of those people, from outside metal, but pulling all those different influences in. Nathan East as well. I thought he was a great bass player. He played for Earth, Wind and Fire and Eric Clapton and supported all. He played for a session. Sorry, he was a session player for all the great guys in the 80s and 90s as well, like Phil Collins and people like that. So I'll listen to anything, as long as it's good. I'll listen to it all, and what I like to do is not just with music, but with other parts of my life. I love finding the intersection, the sort of interesting intersection between two different things. So if there's like a commonality between, I don't know, well, let's say like Iron Maiden and Jamiroquai, that just is like, well, they don't go together. They're like complete worlds apart. But if you can find maybe where there's a possible intersection, then that's your innovation, and that's where you might come up with something different.
Okay, then. So, how did you guys hook up Sky Empire? How did you all get together? And how many demos did you do before your first EP?
Well, Daz and I have been playing forever since we were teenagers. We've been playing forever, so that's that. And we've had a few different projects on the go in the past. We had a band called Core Project, which almost got picked up, but it was, I don't know if you've heard our first album, Dark Tower. But
Recently.
You've recently, okay, so that you're aware that's a pretty Widley piece of work, right?
Yeah.
Well, Core Project was, parts of that were even Widlier and weirder, and
I mean, a bit like Watchtower. That's kind of wiggly diddly.
Yeah, it was too, it was too up its own, too far up its own backside, to be perfectly frank. It's obsessed with the numbers and the calculus and the difficulty, and it's like
back then, did you have Carol Vorderman involved with the mathematics?
Yeah, exactly. It should be in the background in the rehearsal. Does that add up? Can we have like 1 from the bottom and 5 from the top, Carol, to make sure this time signature works? Yeah, it's a little bit like that. So we did reasonably well. We flogged a few albums, and we were supposed to make a second album, which never materialized, and so that sort of died a death a little bit. I played in a couple of other bands, not very seriously, just for fun. I played in a ton of covers bands, which I loved, which was great fun. We were always figuring out sort of innovative new ways to do medleys and segues between songs. We did a metal medley. It wasn't really a medley. It's like a segue, and it's stitched together about 8 songs, and it was half an hour long. And
they're all special.
It was great, and it was like, trying to get the audience to spot what was going to come next. And they go, oh yeah, they were good times. So I loved playing with the covers groups. And then sorry, you're asking how we all got together. So I'm going off on a tangent. I tend to do that. So Daz and I have always been playing together. We first met Remi in about 2010, I think, which is when Core Project, which was one of the old bands, was knocking around. And he was quite young, Remi, back then. He could only have been 18 or 19. And we thought, wow, this fabulous drummer. So we got him involved. He wasn't the original drummer. The original drummer was a guy called Pavel Zavadsky who played in a few Australian bands, and a bass player called Nick Chandler. Those guys left, so we recruited a couple of other guys, but it didn't last. Excuse me, and so that died a death. But Remi also, we always had the sense that Remi's a guy to stay in touch with. If ever anything picks up again, then we got to stay in touch with this guy. And I think he got the sense that there was potential in the music too. because he was one of the, well, yeah, only like 2 people that we ever met who could actually play it. But he was more involved. He was more open to songwriting from the drummer's perspective. So not just sort of following what, because Daz is the principal songwriter, not just following his lead. And so we thought, oh yeah, there's some good chemistry there, and we should try and wheedle that out. Tom, we met Tom a long time ago, probably, God, it must be like 18 years ago now, something like that, maybe 16, 17, 18 years ago. Tom, he auditioned for Core Project. It didn't really work out, to be perfectly honest, but again, we knew he could play, but it didn't really work out. And Daz got back in touch with him many years later when it became apparent that Sky Empire was actually going to get somewhere. I didn't play on the Dark Tower as the bass player. He got Daz got a session guy in to do the Dark Tower, so I didn't play on that. But I did have songwriting credits on it, and I wrote lyrics for 3 of the tracks on it. So because it was, even when I wasn't able to play, and I said to Daz, look, I don't, you know, it feels like my time has run its road in terms of music. So I stepped back, but I said, I still want to support you as in anything that I can do. And he said, yeah, well, I you know, write some lyrics for me. That would be great. So I did that. And I contributed a little bit of the music to Sorcerer's Apprentice and a couple of other small bits and pieces on the Dark Tower. But principally, I'd stepped back at that point. And then, well, like I said, Daz sort of re-invited me back fully when it became clear that Tectonic Plates was actually going to go somewhere. And it was like, yeah, it was like you let something go and it comes right back to you in a really lovely way, you know. Because when we wrapped things up, or when I wrapped things up, there was nothing sort of acrimonious or anything like that. It was all done in sort of perfectly good grace. And then I believe that if you do that sort of thing, and if you let things go in the proper way with a good heart, then they can surprise you, and they might come back into your life in some other form. And I think that's what's happened here.
Right.
So that's the lineup. And I should mention Jordan as well. So Jordan was recruited by Daz about 10 years ago, and we started playing a little bit. Then they recorded Dark Tower, and obviously after Jordan's death, that was another almost like another cut, you know, like an end point for the band. You think, well, how do you go on after that? It's done again, you know, it's finished. But Daz he still had ideas, he still had writing in him. And you know, I don't know if you write at all, but if you've got stuff in you,
I have done, yeah.
If you've got something in you, I write novels as well. I do write science fiction and historical fiction and stuff like that. If you've got something in you, it can't help but make itself come out in some way. And so Daryl still had the music coming out, and he put together Tectonic Plates, and yeah, and then he thought, well, I need a singer. And so he got in touch with Jeff.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that shortly. So the name Sky Empire, to be honest with you, Dan, I've never even heard of your band until recently. You know, I know the guys like Threshold guys, I know the guys from Shadow Keep. You probably know all those bands, friends with them. But how did you come up with the name Sky Empire?
Oh, you'll have to ask Daz that one. That was when I was sort of stepped back a little bit, but you'll have to ask him about that. I think he wanted something. He's very orderly. Is our Daz, and he's very particular. He's very analytical, and he thinks about stuff a lot. I'm a bit more free and easy. I like to sort of intuitively pick find the connections between things and discover stuff. But he's extremely analytical, especially when it comes to music. And I think he once told me that there must be a formula as to the amount of syllables that you put into a band name. And I thought you could be right, but maybe you just pluck a great name out of the air. But I think he probably thought about the way that it trips off the tongue, the images that it conjures up, which is something quite big. Sky and Empire, they're both massive, great big things. And he's writing big songs with big instrumentals and big sounds. I think that's pretty much it. But you'll have to give him the last word on that.
I say there's a lot of bands out there like Empires of Eden, and trying to remember all these band names that are very similar.
Well, yeah, well, that's it. That's why you got to keep your sort of compendium, haven't you, up to date.
So, who would you say is your band's influences then? Who's inspired you as a band?
I think it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention Dream Theater. I think it's clear. Some people said there were Dream Theater clones, which I think is a tad unfair, because there's a lot of symphonic stuff in there. I think there's a bit of power groove going on in a lot of the riffs, especially a lot of the sort of chunkier, more classically metal riffs that are going on in there. Vocally, I don't think it's anything like Dream Theater personally, but I do get it because structurally, yeah, there are things, there are songwriting aspects to the Sky Empire songs. The three act structure of a longer song, instrumental passages. There's a lot of technical flourishes in there. We try and go for lyrics that are not esoteric. I think esoteric is pushing it too far, but that are, have some depth and some thematic resonance to them, which are all Dream Theater traits as well. So there is that, but I think it's wider than that. I listed some of my influences like Maiden and people like that, but I think there's bands like Mushroom Head are in there. I think that there are a few dashes of thrash, especially on the Dark Tower. If you listen to something like Champions of Light, that's got thrash written through it. So Anthrax and Slayer are in there. Maybe not all the time, but they're in there. And these days I'm listening to Tesseract and Hacken and people like that. I think they're really, again, they're really innovative bands, especially Tesseract. I think they're really interesting what they try and do with their music. I don't think we're on that sort of gent side of things, but you never know. Like I said, I like to sort of think of strange connections between things. So if you get back to the songwriting for the next couple of albums, you never know what might happen.
I mean,
I'm open to anything.
I mean, to me, when I listen to your album, bands that sprung to mind was Sons of Apollo, obviously, because of Jeff's
Sons
in
of
there.
Apollo.
Yeah, you would have a band called Ivanhoe from Germany. Would also have another band. There's some really interesting elements in your music. I mean, there is the Dream Theater elements in there. I mean, me personally, one of my favorite progressive metal bands is Fate's Warning, and also and also a band called Psychotic Waltz. And if you know those guys, but those guys.
I don't know. No, I don't know that. I mean, Fate's Warning. Yeah, I even think in this on the latest album, I think there are bits of there are some more 70s and 80s stuff in there as well. There's a bit more electronic stuff. There's a bit of, I think some of the lighter parts remind me of bands like Marillion, which I think again is a bit odd, but I can hear it in there. And I can hear things like the early 70s English prog bands as well, in that insistent where the music is drawing on that sort of European tradition, so the European folk tradition rather than the American blues tradition.
Yeah,
and when it gets a bit harder and heavier, it sort of, the music tends to sort of fall over into the blues derivative stuff. But a lot of it, I think, actually is more folksy. So things like, there are touches here and there of Gentle Giant and Jethro Tull and Yes.
That's what I was going to say. Psychotic Waltz, the singer plays flute, so you're probably going to enjoy them. But if you're on Facebook, Dan, I'll find you and I'll send you a friend request and I'll send you a link for Psychotic Waltz.
Well, yeah, I've got one of the most common names in the country, so maybe it's easier if I look for you.
So right then, I'm going to talk about the new album then, the Shifting Tectonic Plates of Power, Part 1.
The Shifting Tectonic Plates of Power.
But it's a long tongue twister.
Yeah,
tell me how it came about, the album title, and what other titles did you have, and why is it called Part 1? Obviously, you got Part 2 coming.
It's just this bigness of everything that the band is doing. You know, if we can embiggen our bigness by biggening the title up, then you know it's all to the big. So that's essentially what it's about. And it's part one as well. It's not even like this is the whole thing. There's parts of the story that are yet to be told. It came what the title means, apart from, you know, I'm being a bit facetious, a bit flippant, but it is reflecting not so much a shift in you know, power in terms of, you know, how we think of it like geopolitically or anything like that. For me, the story is really a transformation of personality. So we have our protagonist who is nameless. We can talk about the story a little bit later. Or something else about the story, but we're cooking something else up in the background, but I'll leave it for now. And it's really a very classical, in my eyes, it's a classical mythological hero story of somebody who is called to adventure when he believes that his life is limited to a very small fishing village, which is referenced as Hallowed Haven. So the village on the shores is called literally Hallowed Haven. And he thinks that's where his life is, and that's where it's contained, and that's that. You know, it's like Luke on Tatooine or Harry Potter living in 4 Privet Drive. It's like, that's my life, that's my lot, and that's it. And then obviously there's a call to adventure, and he realizes that the set of parents that he thinks he has is not his real set of parents, and he's called by his father, who is a much more powerful figure, and he goes off on a journey to really claim his place in the universe. And the point of the story where we leave it is House of Cards. And well, what happens to a house of cards? It comes tumbling down. So that's exactly where we leave the story. His naive ideals, or his idea of claiming this spot in the universe, is actually fallen to pieces when his ideas come up against reality. And so part 2 picks that up. It's a very classical story, and
Okay.
like any concept album or like an opera, you can only tell these stories in broad brushes, which is why I think concept albums work well when they anchor themselves in these sort of mythical terms that you can quite easily understand. You don't need to have very, very deep flashes of characterization or world building. You can understand what the story is doing with the broad brush of lyrics.
Right then, so I mean, how did you hook up with Jeff Scott Soto? I mean, is he actually in the band, or is it just kind of like vocals for this album? And
At the moment, it's vocals for this album, and we will play it by ear as to how things work out for part 2 and any subsequent work. I mean, I know he's got a new project that he's working on, and that's just as Sons of Apollo seems to have been knocked on the head now that, you know, a month ago Mike Portnoy decided.
well,
I like to think that Dream Theater heard Tectonic Plates and thought, oh crap, we better up our game, guys. Let's get Portnoy back in the band.
I mean, once you mentioned, like, because Mike Portnoy's going back to Dream Theater, Mike Mangini could go to Sons of Apollo. It's certainly, they're all friends anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's all very incestuous, isn't it? But you know, we're 1 degree away from those guys. I'd love to do more work with Jeff. He was lovely to work with. You know, he's a consummate professional. As somebody who's worked in the industry as a session player and in top bands, you'd expect nothing less, right? Than an absolute professional. And he turned up. Well, he did the vocals remotely, so he from his studio in the States, and the files were sent to him, and he did his bit there and then sent them back, and he did them very quickly, obviously brilliantly, interpreted the lyrics exactly right, and gave a great performance. And he managed to come over to the UK to shoot a video and do a couple of other bits with us. And he was an absolute professional. Yeah, it was lovely to work with him. If we got the chance to work with him again, I'd you know, snap his hand off. But whether that's going to be possible, I don't know. Practically speaking, it makes more sense to get a vocalist who is at least on the right side of the Atlantic. That would help. But we'll see. You know, we're still on the lookout.
Oh, well, good luck with that. I mean, the album cover. I'm looking at the album cover now. You can see I've got it behind me. It's very kind of Dream Theater. Is it the same artist who worked with Dream Theater? It's very similar.
Good question. Pass. You'll have to ask Daz.
Right.
I don't know who the artist is. That's a good question.
It's very similar. It's very similar, though.
It does have that sort of feel. Interestingly, it wasn't the first draft. The first draft was something completely different and something that was more in line with the story content of the album. So it was a scene depicting the sea and a ship coming in from the horizon to pick up our main protagonist and whisk him away on his adventures. So it's more of a literal translation or an event from the story. This is more, I guess, thematic of the music, or it's more abstract, a more abstract representation of what's going on. You know, somebody's being lifted from their earthly ties, their mundane spot of rock on the ground, and they're being lifted up into the air, which is kind of what the music is trying to do as well, I suppose. I hope.
Okay, and so briefly, I've got a few more questions before we go. Off the album, what's your favourite songs and why?
God, I can't choose. All right then. I love House of Cards. I love it. I love the instrumental break. It's a lot of fun to do the instrumental break. It's that sort of Iron Maiden galloping riff where it goes down to the dominant seventh and the flat sixth, and it's sort of playing around that. It feels very Iron Maiden, and it's a lot of fun to play. You know, it's good fun. So to listen to, I don't know, Wayfarer. I like it all. There's only 7 tracks, so there's not many to pick from.
No, I mean, if you had to how would you compare this album to the previous album?
It's got to say it feels more rounded. It feels more balanced. Feels more sophisticated. Feels more restrained. Feels more fun, I think, as well. Although there was some fun bits on Dark Tower too. So yeah, a bit more, slightly more grown up, possibly. A bit more professional.
Okay, the label is it ViciSolum Productions? Never heard of them. Yeah, where they're from? Where they're from?
They're Swedish. They're quite a big indie label. I'd go to their website. They've got a roster of all their bands, and they got some pretty decent bands on there. So it's worth checking them out, definitely.
I will do. So I mean, when do you think you're going to be touring? Then is anything in the cards? When you get a singer, you're thinking of getting some gigs lined up?
Well, like I said, that is the $1 million question, I suppose. If we can, the first thing is the practical limitations. Remi is in the south of France. The rest of us are in the UK, and even if we had Jeff nailed on, he's in LA. So the likelihood of, you know, the stars have to align for certain things to happen. We in the management have had a couple of words with some European festivals for 2024. So there's a possibility. Who steps in to sing, we don't know. So that's the two things that have got a line up for us. I'd love to take this onto the road and start playing it again in front of audiences, because it's been way too long, and we're waking up and finding there's a whole new raft of listeners and fans who are discovering this. And you're right, the first album definitely crept under the radar. It didn't sell brilliantly, but a few people heard it and sat up and took notice, and this one has made more of a splash, and you know, people want to hear it. So if people want to hear it that much, then I guess we can make something happen. But yeah, there are some practical constraints that we got to deal with.
Right. Well, no, one more question before we come to an end. How long did it take to record this album, briefly?
Oh, well, okay. Really, Do you mean the recording process or the whole shebang
The
with
whole
writing?
shebang, the whole
The whole
shebang. Yeah,
shebang.
yeah.
I reckon Daz has had this idea in his head rattling around for at least 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I reckon he started on parts of this, and I might be wrong. I reckon he started on parts of this before he finished writing all the parts of the Dark Tower. And he was writing the Dark Tower, like I said, about 10 years ago. And I reckon some of this was rattling around in his little old brain before then. So it took a long time because it's a complicated piece. And I say this album, but I think he would say that the part 2 element was probably rattling around as well. So there's a lot of, there's almost probably more than 2 hours of music to try and organize, and complicated music. That's like it's like a symphony or something. It's like 2 symphonies to try and rattle around. So it's taken him a long time. Recording took about a year. Some of it was done digitally, some of it was done remotely. So there's a whole bunch of different approaches that were taken. Then Daz did all the production as well. And then once that was all done, then it was whisked over to Sean at Abbey Road, which was fantastic. That was a nice little coup as well.
Awesome. Right. So, Dan, I'd like to thank you for doing this interview. Do you have anything to say to the people watching this on YouTube? And best of luck.
I would say thanks for listening. Thanks for putting up with my waffling. Go listen to the album. And if you want to see us, then let us know, because then we get all these messages and we got to send them over to our label and send them over to our management and say, look, there are people who want to see this. So come on, let's make it happen. Let's make 2024 the year that we can get back in the saddle.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dan. Have a nice evening.
Yeah. Cheers, Jason.
Keep in touch,
Thanks
my
for
friend.
having me.
Yeah.
No worries. Cheers, Jason.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for
my
the
friend.
time.
Take care. All the best.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye. Thank you.